As you probably know, we've just seized a tanker on the coast of Venezuela, a large tanker, very large. Largest one ever seized, actually. And other things are happening, so.
Can you explain a little more about this Venezuelan oil tanker and share a little more information?
Well, I'll let the people do it, but you see the result, and I guess they probably have released the pictures by now, or pretty soon. You'll discuss that with the appropriate people later on, but no, it was seized for a very good reason.
The oil tanker, who owns that oil tanker?
You'll get that information later.
Okay, and have you spoken to Maduro since your last conversation?
No, I
Has it
haven't.
only been one conversation?
No.
We're interested in the seizure of this tanker. What happens to the oil on that ship?
Well, we keep it, I guess.
Where does it go? What port does it go to?
Well, you have to follow the tanker. You're a good newsman, just follow the tanker.
Do you know where it was going? Was it going to
Follow it.
China?
Get a helicopter and follow the tanker.
Is it true it's going to
But
Cuba?
we're I assume we're gonna keep the oil.
Venezuela is currently experiencing a tightened tension with the United States troops deployed within their locality after President Donald J. Trump has just commissioned the seizure of the Venezuelan oil tank that is believed to have carried more than 2 million barrels. The tank or the ship is believed to be owned by one company from Nigeria, and this ship has been sanctioned for a very long period of time, believed to have been one vessel that has been used to supply the RIGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. And so this is what happened.
Con un ojo pelado y el otro también. Trabajando, produciendo, construyendo, funcionando todo siempre. Y preparados para partirle los dientes al imperio norteamericano si hiciera falta desde la patria de Bolívar.
And there's quite an interesting choice of phrase. He's prepared to break the teeth of the North American empire if necessary, because there are three variables that you just don't know if you're going into any conflict. And I'm not saying this will be a war. So the first variable is, will they fight? Will the Venezuelans fight? The second one is, how well will they fight or defend? And the third one is, for how long will they fight or defend? And to look at that, you need to look at the capabilities of the Venezuelans and where they might do damage to the Americans should anything occur. We know in the last few weeks that Maduro has reached out to, the authoritarian axis, as it were, and has tried to get sort of additional radars from China, Iran, and Russia. And we know that over the last 20 years, there have been something like $4 billion worth of defense agreements between Russia and Venezuela. So the three key capabilities really, though, within that we're looking at are, firstly, there are supposedly a number of anti-ship missiles that the Venezuelans have, both Iranian and Chinese, of which the most predominant ones that we would talk about are the Chinese C-802 and the Iranian Nazir. That could be potentially a ship killer, but then you'd have this sword versus shield in terms of, is the electronic warfare capability of the Americans so great that it will negate the homing and guidance facilities of the anti-ship missiles. The second capability would be a sort of modeling on the Iranian fast attack craft, the IRGC swarms. Could there be a swarm of small boats going towards any American shipping? And the third one is they've got fairly significant drone capabilities, including the Shahed 136, which we've seen operated in Russia but that's the Iranian drone, both predominant or evident in the drone swarms over Ukraine, and potentially could be over the US fleet. So none of this is a done deal that it would be painless for the Americans. And that's why they've got to be very careful in how they do this, and why there might be strategic hesitancy from the Americans in going further in escalatory terms into the involvement in land targets. Now, that doesn't mean they won't try and take on land targets. I don't think it means with the forces that are arrayed from the Americans that we're going to have an overt invasion for the Americans. I just don't see enough forces to do that. You could use forces for raids on specific objectives, things that they think are labs and infrastructure, but you can do that by offset methods these days by using Tomahawk missiles, for example, and the American targeting is the most exotic in the world. So you don't really need to put raiding parties on the ground if you can guarantee destruction from offset weapons. We really see the limits of Russian power in when other countries have called upon them to help. So this summer, for example, the Iranians would have really liked the Russian assistance when the Israelis were doing things to them. They did nothing. Assad wanted Russian assistance a year ago. They did nothing. So the limits of Russian power are being shown to be evident this year. And again, I think there would be strategic hesitancy from China in giving overt support to Venezuela. They might give sort of moral support, but nothing more than that. In terms of a wider war, you have to be careful in how we use the nomenclature of these things. The use of the term war is an act of war is a political phrase. It is not a legal phrase. In terms of how that plays out in the UN, the UN only authorizes war in two circumstances. Firstly, when it's authorized by a UN Security Council resolution, or secondly, under Article 51 in an act of self-defense. That could be an interesting one because obviously in terms of the new US national security strategy, they've emphasized once more that their predominant number one goal is a dominance of the Western Hemisphere. So again, if you're Mexico or Canada as the 51st state or Greenland, you'd be slightly worried. But you could flip that on its head, what I've just said, and it could be actually Venezuela that went to the UN Security Council and said that Article 51 should be invoked in support of Venezuela. Now, do America care about that? No, I don't think they do. We're in an age when Trumpian politics means that the niceties of international law and international relations don't seem to pertain. And we've kind of seen that recently with all the fog of war about did two people who were alive after an initial strike in September then be taken out in contravention of the laws of war, i.e. they were no longer a threat. But I don't think any of those nuances really are cared about by the Secretary of War in America or by Trump at the moment. In those various ways that you can escalate. So when I talked about the domains, I talked about land, sea and air as the three predominant ones. We've seen the activity with the tanker in the last 24 hours in the sea domain alongside the small boats. So the two other things to look for is firstly, if there's any change in the land domain, do they do any strikes on land? And secondly, how are they doing those strikes? Is the use of air power going to be one of the key conditions for the Americans? Again, America has the most exotic air power in the world. But again, if you're going to use air power significantly to attack land targets, you normally have what the Americans call phase zero operations, when you would get rid of all the Venezuelan radars so that you blind them, so you've got freedom of action. In the same way that the Americans have sea control at the moment, they would want to establish air dominance or air supremacy. And that is normally a prerequisite. So it's looking at what they do in those other two domains, which will give.
This will not be the first time when America is taking a military action, rather sanctioning the nation of Venezuela. During the first term of President Trump sanctioned President Maduro, and actually he was in support of the opposition leader as he was claiming that Maduro is a dictator. On the other hand, the president of the United States has complained that Maduro is actually peddling the business of drug. At the same time, President Trump claims that Maduro is abusing human rights. And so that is the reason as why the nation of America has decided to take the military action against Venezuela and sanction its industry for the oil. Recent development includes the seizure of the Venezuelan oil tank Skipper, an act that the Venezuelan President Maduro has termed as international piracy, saying that the United States is trying to take a control over the Venezuelan oil reserve. And now this is what we had to bring.
The Trump administration now ratcheting up the pressure on Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro, hitting members of his family with new sanctions and threatening more military action.
And Jared Hill has more from New York.
It's going to be starting on land pretty soon.
President Trump is threatening more action against Venezuela, saying this week's seizure of a tanker off the country's coast was about more than illicit oil, but also illegal immigration and drug trafficking.
It was a successful operation directed by the president to ensure that we're pushing back on a regime that is systematically covering and flooding our country with deadly drugs.
As the tanker now heads to a U.S. port and the White House says investigators are interviewing its crew, sources warn that the Trump administration is planning to seize more ships.
We're not going to stand by and watch sanctioned vessels sail the seas with black market oil, the proceeds of which will fuel narco-terrorism of rogue and illegitimate regimes around the world.
Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro slammed the tanker operation on state TV Thursday, likening it to Pirates of the Caribbean. On Capitol Hill, there are bipartisan calls for more transparency from the White House.
What are we doing down there? No one's told us.
The president has stated neither to us nor the American people what exactly the end game, the strategy, the goal is here.
This as the Trump administration has slapped new sanctions on people and businesses with ties to Maduro, including 3 of his wife's nephews, a businessman with connections to Maduro, and 6 shipping companies that operate in Venezuela's oil sector.
Before an act of seizure of Skipper, the President of America has intensified attacks on the Venezuela vessels in the Caribbean Sea. And the video that follows next is the attacks that have happened when the United States of America strike the ships and the vessels in the ocean, blasting them. And this has caused many death and destruction. And still the president is threatening to take a serious military action by deploying their troops along the borders of the Venezuelan country, as well as on the highlands in the Caribbean Sea. And so this act of aggression has sparked various reactions all over the world.
Or is the U.S. up to something bigger in the Caribbean? The Roosevelt Roads Naval Base in Puerto Rico was shut down in 2004. For the last 2 decades, it was abandoned and slowly being reclaimed by nature. But now, the U.S. military is back, and with their most advanced fighters, Reaper drones, and Osprey tilt-rotor aircraft. Puerto Rico is a largely self-governed territory of the U.S. The U.S. military buildup is not only on the island, it's taking place across the Caribbean, with warships, aircraft, and even a nuclear-powered submarine. And their sights are set on Venezuela.
It's a significant deployment. We haven't seen anything like this in a generation.
Christopher Hernandez-Roy is an expert on the Americas and on geopolitics at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a U.S. think tank.
For a counter-narcotics operation, it is much larger than anything that's ever been seen.
For Trump, it's not just a war on drugs, but on terrorism. His administration has designated several cartels and criminal gangs, among them Tren de Aragua, as terrorist organizations.
That's a big one.
The president's thesis is that Venezuela is run by a drug cartel, and Nicolas Maduro sits at the top of that cartel.
This is what Trump posted. Tren de Aragua is operating under the control of Nicolas Maduro. The series of U.S. strikes on drug boats allegedly run by smugglers from Venezuela has killed dozens. United Nations rights experts have slammed the military strikes as lawless and as extrajudicial executions. The strikes stand in stark contrast to previous U.S. counter-drug operations. The U.S. Coast Guard used to intercept such boats and arrest and interrogate suspected smugglers. Now the suspects are simply being blown up.
Venezuela is deeply involved in the drug trade. It's a very important transit nation.
Jeremy McDermott is co-director of Insight Crime, an organization dedicated to studying organized crime.
Venezuela obviously has an enormous coastline, which is the Caribbean and the Atlantic. The stuff going through the Caribbean, some is bound for the United States, but a significant amount is bound for Europe. But the Pacific is more important than the Caribbean or Atlantic seaboards for drug smuggling into the United States. If we look at this from a drug trafficking perspective, it would indeed make more sense to station this flotilla in the Pacific.
But instead, Trump has zeroed in on Venezuela under Maduro, and it's not the first time. In Trump's first term, Maduro was already charged with narco-terrorism in the U.S., and a bounty was put on his head. Now that bounty has increased to $50 million. That's twice the amount the U.S. offered for Osama bin Laden.
What Nicolas Maduro has done is he has created a form of hybrid criminal governance. He's not running directly a drug trafficking organization. His regime has made alliances with criminal actors, including drug traffickers, and he is facilitating and protecting these businesses in exchange for the criminal rents he needs to maintain the loyalty to his regime.
So Trump does have a rationale if this is about fighting drugs. The U.S. has a major drug problem. Hundreds of thousands have died in recent years from opioids, heroin, and fentanyl. Donald Trump promised to stop the flow of drugs. But the size of the Caribbean operation could also indicate something else.
Some think that part of the pressure is, at a minimum, to get the regime to change certain behaviors and provide concessions. And others think that it could be an effort to push Maduro out of power.
And that's what Maduro himself also seems to believe.
El objetivo es entrar y apoderarse de Venezuela y hacer un cambio de régimen en Venezuela.
Maduro has mobilized the population, warning he's ready to declare a state of emergency if the U.S. attacks. Trump has authorized a CIA covert operation. So is the real U.S. goal to take Maduro down? To understand what's at stake, we need to take a closer look at this country, which, by the way, has the largest oil reserves in the world. It shares a land border with 3 countries, and additionally has several island states close by.
I still think that Venezuela is very important geopolitically for the region, not only for the Caribbean, but the entire Latin America and South American geography.
Oskar Schlenker is DW's correspondent for Venezuela. Born and raised in the country, he's currently in Germany.
When our country was in better shape, we were the door to South America.
In the 1970s, Venezuela was one of the richest countries in the region. The main reason? Those big oil reserves. For example, here, the Orinoco oil belt has huge potential, but it's far from being fully used. Today, after years of mismanagement, the Venezuelan oil industry is in disrepair. Corruption and organized crime is thriving, and the population is suffering from poverty, causing millions to leave the country. And growing tensions with the United States led to various sanctions starting in 2005, with Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez.
He had a really anti-American, anti-U.S. rhetoric. U.S. and Venezuelan relations have been really bad for a number of years now.
Chavez died in office in 2013. Maduro has since installed a ruthless authoritarian regime. When Trump was asked if he wanted a regime change, he downplayed the possibility.
Well, we're not talking about that, but we are talking about the fact that you had an election which was a very strange election.
The U.S. called the recent presidential elections in Venezuela illegitimate and does not recognize Maduro as the president. Opposition candidates have either fled the country or were forced into hiding. That includes opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, who got the Nobel Peace Prize for her persistent efforts to restore democracy and defend human rights in her country. Meanwhile, the U.S. is considering military strikes within Venezuela.
I think what the US is seeking to do here is to create fractures or ruptures within the Maduro regime. Everything depends on the military in Venezuela. The military essentially supports the Maduro regime, and of course, it's the main instrument of repression.
And that military has profited from organized crime. So the idea might be weaken the system that keeps Maduro in power to eventually take him down in the process.
I think they are trying to do everything possible or everything at their disposition to try and damage Maduro's administration.
But let's keep in mind, it wouldn't be the first time the U.S. toppled a government led by someone wanted on U.S. drugs charges. That's what happened in Panama in 1989 when the U.S. invaded the country.
What exactly would America be after? Because we understand that the issue goes beyond just arresting a drug lord into maybe toppling over a dictator from leadership and planting a leader that would cooperate with their terms and conditions. Because 2 years ago, there were reports of the CIA agents trying to bribe President Nicolas Maduro's pilot so that he can divert the plane and land it into American safe zone. The man was promised billions of dollars, or rather millions, and also promised a safe haven where he will live safe and rich. Do you think America is really behind the drug business that is going on in Venezuela? Maybe it might be something more mysterious than what we think. And now get to have a look at this video on what exactly America planned.
It reads like a Hollywood spy thriller. On one side was a decorated Venezuelan pilot. On the other was a U.S. federal agent. The pitch was this. The agent wanted to bribe Nicolas Maduro's pilot. Maduro is the president of Venezuela. The American agent wanted to bribe his pilot. To do what? Divert the Venezuelan president's plane so that the Americans could capture him. Thus began a 16-month-long covert operation. It started in 2024, but the Venezuelan pilot ghosted the U.S. agent. So the operation failed and Maduro is still in power in Venezuela. Our next report tells you more.
The pitch was simple. Divert the plane. Land somewhere friendly. We'll take care of the rest. You'll be rich beyond imagination. The target was a decorated Venezuelan Air Force officer and Nicolas Maduro's trusted pilot. The man who flew the most wanted president on earth into Moscow, Tehran, Havana, and back. The messenger was a former U.S. Army Ranger turned Homeland Security agent. And so began one of the most audacious operations in modern U.S.-Venezuela history. A rogue recruitment attempt that danced on the edge of geopolitics and Hollywood fantasy. To Washington, this pilot wasn't just a pilot. He was the Achilles heel. A man who knew every runway Maduro trusted, every emergency protocol, every decoy route, every midnight hop to a sympathetic capital. If you're trying to topple a leader you can't invade, indict, or intimidate, You flip the guy holding the joystick. That's the theory. So, they pursued him like no one else. Encrypted chats, whispered promises, the kind of careful, unglamorous spycraft that looks boring until suddenly it isn't. For 16 months, the agent worked him like a long con. At first, the pilot played along, just enough to leave doubt. A phone number here, a hint of curiosity there. Then came silence, then suspicion. America had misread the room. When persuasion failed, the U.S. side tried something else: psychological warfare. A leaked photo here, a mocking tweet there. A digital whisper campaign designed to make Caracas ask, is the pilot ours, or is he theirs? For a few hours, Venezuela held its breath. The presidential jet took off, looped, and returned. Rumors exploded online. Has he been arrested? Is he being interrogated? Did the Americans break him? You could almost hear spy movie violins. Then came the dramatic reveal. The pilot reappeared days later on state TV, flanked by hardliners, raising his fist in perfect revolutionary posture. The message was delivered. Beneath the cloak and dagger theater lies a blunt truth. This wasn't just about one pilot. It was a window into a shadow conflict that's no longer subtle. U.S. President Donald Trump has been escalating tensions with Venezuela in the last few months. President Trump dialed foreign policy like a late-night talk show. Loud, unpredictable, ratings-driven. He has sent ships to the Caribbean. American military has struck so-called drug boats. The administration has authorized covert CIA action in the country. And the bounty on Maduro's head has been doubled to $50 million. So is Trump trying to dethrone Maduro? Let's put it this way. If regime change were a movie, the trailer is already playing out. With military posturing, economic chokeholds, and cyber and psychological operations. Meanwhile, Venezuela says U.S. is making up an eternal war.
And the people of the United States know it. They're making up a new eternal war. They promise that they will never enter a war, and they're making up a war that we will avoid. How? With the mobilization of the peoples of South America.
For now, the tensions are simmering. But in the end, no pilot was flipped, and there was no revolution unfolded at 30,000 feet. Just one more covert plot, grounded by reality. But the next chapter in this U.S.-Venezuela tensions is still taxiing down the runway.
The people of Venezuela are standing for freedom and democracy, and the United States of America is standing right by their side.
President Trump had the room on its feet at Florida International University late this afternoon with a message for Venezuela. The president said a new day is coming in Latin America.
We have CBS 4 live team coverage on the president's South Florida stop, beginning with CBS 4's Joan Murray. She's live at FIU. Joan.
Packed crowd here at the Ocean Bank Center of FIU this afternoon. There were so many people, many could not even get in, so they piped the speech of the president to the outside. People lined up out here. Meanwhile, inside, a very welcoming crowd for the president as he pledged his support for the people of Venezuela.
A new day is coming in Latin America. It's coming.
Before a packed crowd at FIU, President Donald Trump told the Venezuelan American community he stands with the people of Venezuela.
In Venezuela and across the Western Hemisphere, socialism is dying, and liberty, prosperity, and democracy are being reborn.
He recognized interim President Juan Guaido, who spoke via satellite just before he took to the stage, called again once more for Nicolas Maduro.
If there is one method that the United States of America has tried over a very long period of time, is to try find solution through wars and battles. And America has made several mistakes until even the leaders of America themselves have reached a point of trying to actually review and realize that the decision that they made of taking a military action was not the right decision. If I'm not wrong, it is President Trump who is now trying to actually approach Venezuela through the military aggression that condemned President Obama for all the military actions that were taken overseas. President Trump told us that what President Obama did in Iraq was actually not called for. President Trump told us that what President Obama did by taking down President Gaddafi was not called for. And he actually tried to say that by killing these national leaders, these nations remained destabilized. What do you think? As much as President Maduro is accused of abusing human rights, accused of dictatorship, accused of corruption, accused of drug dealing, but there must be some other solutions that America can use to bring President Maduro to obey whatever command they are trying to give. It is not a must for America to take the military action because this simply translates into everybody's going to die. The Venezuelan economy is going to be crept back into poverty. The nation is going to lose the stability that it has right now. Yes, it is very true that President Maduro might be a bad person, but the reality is that by taking President Maduro away, this nation is going to face more than 10 years instability and political actually wavering. So what do you think? Do you think America must take a military action against Venezuela because of the drug peddling business? Do you think it would be the right action for the Marines to be sent to take President Maduro down? If you believe that military action is not always the first option, then please leave a like, share, and comment at the comment section. Remember to help us grow this channel by sharing our videos with your friends so that we are able to grow and keep on bringing you many news. We really appreciate for your time. Do take care, for we shall need you next time. My name is Maxwell.